Hi there, I am Kate Schatz, and I am going to read to you E is for Earth First from the book RAD American History A to Z, written by me and illustrated by Miriam, Klein, Stahl. So this is E for Earth First, and this is the illustration on this is a woman named Judi Bari, and that's who you're going to learn about in the story, and Judy's also on the cover right there. And behind Judy are some beautiful California redwood trees. So E is for Earth First, the movement to save the world's oldest trees. Earth First. It's a rallying cry. It's an ideology that places the health of the planet before all other concerns. It's also the name of a radical activist organization known as Earth First, always with an exclamation point for emphasis, that began in the 1980s. It helped transform the environmental movement and bring attention to the plight of some of Earth's most ancient living beings, California's coastal redwoods. These living giants, botanical name Sequoia sempervirens, are the tallest trees on Earth. They're capable of growing more than 300 feet tall. Undisturbed, California redwoods can live for more than 2,000 years. The very first redwood fossils date back 200 million years ago, all the way back to the Jurassic period. And until the 1850s, they covered more than 2 million acres along the coast of California and Oregon. For centuries, indigenous tribes lived in harmony among the redwoods. Then came the gold rush and an influx of white people. The trees provided sturdy planks for new homes. By the end of the 20th century, 95% of the ancient Sequoia sempervirens had been felled. The 5% of the towering giants that remain on Earth today are in the foggy coastal regions of Northern California. These trees don't matter just because they're beautiful or because they used to hang out with dinosaurs. They matter because they are part of delicate ecosystems that house numerous species of plants and animals, many of which are endangered or threatened, like the spotted owl, the marbled murrelet, which is a rare seabird that nests in the top branches of the trees, and the coho salmon, which swims in the many streams that run through the redwood groves. Although decades of logging eliminated much of the old growth redwood forest until late in the 20th century, the local family-owned lumber companies that had been in the business for generations used sustainable logging methods. These companies knew that if they wanted to continue to have trees to cut down, they had to do it wisely. In 1986, one of these companies, which was called Pacific Lumber, and it had been locally owned by a family since the year 1863, this company was suddenly taken over by Maxam, a huge corporation from the state of Texas. The new owner of Pacific Lumber, instead of the family that had been running it for over a century, the new owner was a millionaire named Charles Hurwitz. And he needed to make as much money as possible because he'd been selling junk bonds, which is a whole other story. But he needed to make a lot of money. He tripled the timber harvest, and he began clear cutting the ancient redwoods. And clear cutting is a practice where you just cut all of the trees in one area down at once instead of doing it sustainably like the other lumber companies had. Environmental activists in the area knew that this method would wipe out the remaining trees in no time. The fight to save the ancient redwoods was on. Enter Earth First, an organization founded around 1981 by a small group of men who were fed up with mainstream environmental activism, which they thought was too polite and careful. Earth First had no real structure, and it did not have a single leader. Anyone who agreed with its philosophies could join. The members published their ideas in the Earth First Journal, and they engaged in mostly secretive, direct attempts to disrupt practices that were destructive to the environment, like logging and the building of nuclear power plants. The Earth First activists were funny and creative, often making music and theater part of their protests. They were also very committed. Their motto was no compromise in defense of Mother Earth. and they were willing to put their bodies in front of bulldozers to protect trees. Longtime activist and union organizer Judi Bari liked this approach. Judy agreed with the Earth First philosophy of deep ecology, which is the idea that Earth is not here just for human consumption, but that all species have a right to exist. Judi Bari had moved to Northern California the same year that the clear cutting began, and she'd begun making her living as a carpenter until she realized that the redwood planks she was hammering nails into came from trees that had been alive for centuries. She turned her attention to the growing activism against the new clear-cutting policies, and she joined forces with local Earth First activists, and she quickly emerged as a powerful and charismatic leader. But Judy didn't like everything about Earth First. Most of the members were pretty macho guys who were focused on daring individual actions. They could be obnoxious and also pretty aggressive in their defense of the trees, and they didn't really have a cohesive strategy. As a feminist, Judy found this approach to be problematic. She thought that big collective actions that bring lots of people together in a nonviolent way would be more effective. She wanted to be more organized. She wanted to have a larger vision. As she took on more of a leadership role, she convinced the Earth Firsters to commit to nonviolence and to publicly denounce dangerous practices like tree spiking, which was the really dangerous practice of inserting metal spikes inside of trees in order to destroy the blades of chainsaws that the loggers were using. It would break the chainsaws, but it could also really injure the loggers because the chains could come off the chainsaw and really injure the loggers. So that was something that she didn't believe in. She thought that that was too violent. And she convinced the Earth Firsters to denounce that. They also denounced monkey wrenching, which was a practice of intentionally destroying machinery or other equipment. She actively recruited women to be more involved with Earth First too. And then she did something that even the most radical activists had not attempted. She reached out to the loggers. Judy was an experienced organizer. She had unionized grocery clerks and postal workers, helping them advocate for better wages and conditions. She was determined to use her background to change the hostile ways that environmental activists and loggers related to each other. She started hanging out in the local bars at night, and this is all up in Humboldt County in Northern California. So she started hanging out at the local bars, getting to know the loggers and having conversations with them instead of just yelling at them. Building trust between Earth First activists and the local workers was not easy, but Judy saw it as an essential piece of the movement's puzzle. Judy argued that loggers and environmentalists should not see each other as enemies. The real enemies, she felt, were the faceless, super-rich corporations that were destroying the planet and creating unsustainable working conditions. She started a small union of timber workers through the International Workers of the World, the IWW, and she made connections between workers who needed jobs and couldn't afford to lose work because of protests, and the people who were passionate about protecting the environment. We all need a healthy planet, Judy argued. Sustainable logging practices are in everyone's best interest. If all the trees were rapidly clear-cut, what would happen to the jobs? At the same time, she worked to convince Earth Firsters that loggers are human beings, not tree-hating monsters. They had families and they needed jobs. Yelling at them would not solve the problem. In February of 1990, Judy had an idea for a major action that would bring national attention to their efforts. That November, Californians would vote on a bill called Forests Forever that would restrict clear cutting. The timber companies had vowed to cut down as many trees as possible before November in case this bill passed. Judy's vision was to get huge numbers of activists to Northern California to protest the destructive logging practices and slow down or even completely halt the timber harvest. With the support of many Earth First activists, Judy announced plans for what they called Redwoods Summer, and she devoted the next several months to making it happen. The model for Redwoods Summer was the Mississippi Freedom Summer of 1964, when thousands of young people traveled to Mississippi to register Black voters and to be part of the civil rights movement. Judy and a handful of other Earth First organizers coordinated the details for the months-long action, which would include marches and sit-ins, direct actions, rallies, guerrilla theater, and more. They recruited college students from around the country. They drew maps, they established schedules, they plotted routes, they built base camps, they did outreach to the media. They coordinated with other activist groups, like Food Not Bombs, who pledged to provide food for all of the activists. Despite Judy's efforts to bridge the divides between activists and locals, it did not always work. Many locals were furious at the idea of thousands of young hippies coming into their communities trying to stop them from doing their jobs. Anti-Earth First bumper stickers decorated the bumpers of trucks all over the towns in Northern California, and many homes displayed signs telling Earth First to leave town. The most serious anger was directed toward Judy, as well as her colleague Daryl Cherney, also several other leaders, but it was mostly Judy and Daryl. They received death threats on a regular basis, and though they reported them to law enforcement, nothing much was done. It was kind of seen as the price that they had to pay for the work that they were doing. Redwood summer was almost underway when one of those threats became reality. On May 24th, 1990, Judy and Daryl were driving in Oakland, California, when a bomb exploded underneath their car, nearly killing them both. They were rushed to the hospital and arrested while undergoing surgery. The police accused them of building the bomb themselves. Word spread that Judy Berry and Earth First were terrorists. Though everyone who knew Judy knew she was committed to nonviolence and would never go near a bomb, let alone build one herself. Prosecutors never filed any actual charges against them, and the Oakland police and the FBI failed to find any evidence. But the damage to Judy and Daryl's reputations had been done. Luckily, the attack did not stop Redwood summer. In fact, it increased participation. As Judy and Daryl recovered, thousands of people participated in nonviolent actions in defense of the ancient redwoods. They traveled to Northern California where they held demonstrations at timber companies. They sang songs, they dressed up like spotted owls, they carried giant puppets. They changed themselves to machinery so that it couldn't be used. They blocked logging roads, and they placed their bodies between loggers and these ancient trees. There were women-led tree sits in which activists sat on platforms high up in the trees, and there were daring banner drops where people unfurled massive banners with protest messages above busy highways. Although the activists did not stop the logging, they definitely brought attention to it. At the end of the summer, people returned to homes and schools. Judy and Daryl were mostly recovered, but no one knew who had placed the bomb under their car. In November, the Forest Forever ballot measure lost by just a few percentage points. Many of the activists felt a sense of despair, but the fight to save California's old-growth redwoods was not over. Judy successfully sued the Oakland police and the FBI in 1991. She and Daryl were awarded $4.4 million. In March 1997, Judy passed away from breast cancer, but she remained a passionate activist up until her death, giving interviews from her hospital bed. Redwood summer did bring awareness to old-growth forest logging, corporate power, and the relationship between social justice and the environmental movement. In 1999, 2 years after Judy passed away, the Headwaters Forest Reserve was created, and it preserved 7,500 acres of ancient, pristine forests. So that is the end of our Earth First story, and I will share that that story is special to me because I got involved in activism when I was a teenager in high school by going up to Headwaters Forest and participating in protests against the logging companies. So I worked with people who were members of Earth First, and that was kind of my introduction into protest and activism, and so that was a special story for me to include in the book. Thank you for listening. Next up is F for the Federal Theater Project.